please forgive. Please forgive the angle. I'm working with what I've got, and what I've currently got is a broken tripod. Earlier in the summer, I started listening to Ethel Cain. I knew of her, as in I knew her name, but I'd never actually heard anything by her. And then I kept seeing like different fanfics that had like their titles were lyrics from her songs. And so I was curious and reached out to a friend. She recommended that I try out some of her stuff. And yeah, I get it. I like most of what I've heard of hers. I'm not super familiar with her as an individual or an artist. I haven't done too much research. But I think it's interesting how she is pushing the line with what is socially accepted, what is taboo, and kind of delving into those uncomfortable spaces in her lyrics and with the narrative structure of her stories. I like the Southern Gothic vibe to her work, but also how so many of her songs seem to delve into different genres. You have rock, you have folk, there's synth, and somehow it all works really well together, I found. There is this sense of tragedy and the corruption of the stereotypical Americana that as Americans we're often fed to believe existed, when really what we're seeing through Ethel Cain's vision is the American nightmare. But yeah, I do enjoy her work, what I've listened to of it, and I'm looking forward to her newest album, which comes out in August. Which brings me to today's video. Why not combine two of my favorite things, music and reading, and do a little reading vlog in which I pick books that I think might have Ethel Cain vibes. I'm going to be attempting to read 3 different books that I chose for various reasons, but the main one being they interested me at this point. But 3 honorable mentions I would like to mention as maybe ones I would try out at some point. The Boatman's Daughter, which, not gonna lie, I didn't think about until after I'd picked the lineup for this, so it is definitely a contender for future reading. Knock 'em Stiff, which is a short story collection and just not something I'm currently in the mood for. And Girls Against God, which I was very tempted to pick for this video, but then I realized it's by the author of Paradise Rot, and I need to do more research into that book before I commit to it. The lineup that I've chosen is very me, I feel like. I found a nice balance primarily with hints of fantasy, but also some literary elements, some historical elements, and then just to throw a wild card in there, we've got poetry. The first book that I remember setting in stone for this vlog is Revelator by Daryl Gregory. I don't know a ton about this book, except for the fact that it's historical fantasy, I'm thinking. It's following a woman who has an encounter with her family's god named Ghost Daddy as a child, eventually flees her home, and then when she comes back, it's to, I believe, take care of her grandmother's land and this child that her grandmother adopted. The premise itself sounds really cool, but it was the fact that the god is named Ghost Daddy that really sold this. Another more fantastical read that I've actually had on my radar for a while now is Motheater by Linda H. Codega. While this hasn't had the best reviews, I've seen a lot of people talking about how it's not so much witchy fantasy as literary fiction with like a fantastical queer bend, and that's kind of my jam, honestly. So I'm really intrigued to get to that one. It's following a woman who, I believe there's been some deaths in a mine. Her friend was killed and she's trying to figure out what happened, and along the way she encounters this woman who only knows her name is Motheater, and she is a witch in Appalachian, Virginia. And lastly, and this might be the most like oddly fitting one I have to see, is Life of the Party by Olivia Gatwood. This is a collection of poems that is looking at girlhood and queerness, at advocacy and autonomy, and I've seen the cover before popping around on the internet, and I believe I had seen a couple of other things by this author, but it was while I was doing research for this vlog and trying to find books to read that I came across a different collection of Gatwood's, but then also found this one, and because it kept kind of popping up over time, I thought it'd be good to try out. The few poems that I've sampled so far, I liked, but it's been a while since I did look at them, so I can't really say how it's going to fit into this entire process. And those are the 3 books that are on the docket for this reading vlog. I'm hoping to spend the rest of the summer reading these and kind of figuring out like what I think of them in the sense of how they could potentially fit into the Ethel Cain aesthetic. A quick thing, go on and mention it now, there will be no spoilers in this video. I'm going to do my best to keep this spoiler free and instead focus not so much on the summary of the stories or how do you spoil a poetry collection? I don't know. But not tell what happens to the stories and the characters, but instead focus on the vibes and the themes and how there's overlap between them and Ethel Cain's work, and if there is overlap. I hope this turns out to be fun, and with me going into less detail than my previous vlogs, maybe it'll be easier on me to like not only put together, but just to feel comfortable about being on camera and talking. The language of true crime is coded. It tells us our degree of mourning is contingent on the victim's story. While students and athletes are often remembered for their accolades and looks, sex workers or women who struggled with addiction are reduced to those identities as a justification for the violence committed against them, if their stories are even covered at all. The truth is, it is a privilege to have your body looked for. I finished. So, Life of the Party, poetry collection. I think if I'm considering Ethel Cain vibes, it's a good starting place. I think we're off to a solid start. I think I mentioned earlier, Life of the Party is looking at girlhood, but also womanhood in general, and the way that in our society, women are so often expected to defer to men to make decisions that benefit men, that please men, and how we're obsessed with true crime. I also like the way that in these poems she's looking at the inherent sexuality of growing up, of going through puberty, and the way that your body is changing. She doesn't shy away from that, and I think depending on who's reading this, it's going to bring about some uncomfortable feelings, and ultimately that's the point, because people are uncomfortable with sex. People are uncomfortable with bodies. To me, the reason this isn't like a full-on Ethel Cain wreck would be the third section. The first two are more grounded in, I guess you would say, girlhood, womanhood, the violence of men, and how women have to make choices that sometimes they don't want to navigate those violent men. How we have to cut away parts of ourselves and change our daily routines and our habits in order to feel safe. And that like really hit me. But the third section felt a little bit disjointed. Parts 1 and 2 focus more on the general sense of nameless men committing violent acts upon women. But toward the end of part 2, we start getting a focus on Aileen Wuornos. I don't know if I said her name right. But she was a woman who, I think in the 90s, murdered several men who attempted to assault her. I actually need to do more research into her because I wasn't familiar with her name. When I started reading this, I'd only seen photos of her. So that might be something to educate myself on more. But I'm saying this because in part 3, we really get a shift to telling poems about Wuornos specifically, and sort of like what Gatwood has learned from her. I don't know, the shift seemed kind of abrupt. It didn't fully mesh with the parts that came before it, and I will definitely say in part 3 there were a lot less poems that I annotated and tabbed because they just didn't really connect with me. And that's another thing I will say about Life of the Party and poetry in general. I think poetry is even more subjective than prose. Sometimes, if you don't like a poet's word choice, if you don't like their language, if you don't like the construction, it's really not going to hit. I don't think her language itself was my favorite of the poetry collections I've read, but what I did like was how just upfront and blatant and honest she was when it came to girlhood and bodies and queerness and falling in love and fears and anxieties, voicing things in a very blunt way that I think sometimes we can like ride around in poetry and even in prose. I do think reading this collection like through the vantage point of making Ethel Cain connections did influence my reading of it, and I think that's why I did like the first two parts so much, because certain lines like I was able to really connect with Ethel Cain songs, but also even the cover of the Inbred EP. There's a poem in here called All of the Beautiful Ones Were Catholic, and the starting lines of it really reminded me of the imagery from Inbred. Tight buns at the napes of their necks, hair combed slick behind their ears, and middle parts so straight they might have been split with a razor by their mothers that morning. Like, that's very Inbred cover. Like, yeah. As I wrote, I was making little notes throughout. Sometimes it was actual observations I had about what Gatwood was saying, but then other times it was making connections to songs, whether it was naming those songs up front or just making a note of some of the lyrics that we see. Like most recently in one of the poems, no, we're not saying that. I'm not saying that word. But yeah, good starting point. Enjoyed this, and I'm looking forward to seeing maybe if the next book I read is even more Ethel Cain vibe. So I fully intended to do a check-in when I was halfway through Motheater, but life kind of spiraled for a tiny bit. My nieces were over, so I was busy. And then I got sick, and didn't feel like doing much of anything, especially filming, but also reading. So it took me a little longer to wrap up the book, but I finished. And yeah, I do think it has Ethel Cain vibes. Motheater is set in this coal mining Appalachian town, and it follows Benny Maddox, who is a former employee of this coal company, White Rock. She's actually been fired, though, recently because her and her best friend have been trying to find evidence that White Rock is cutting corners, or they're not ensuring the safety of their employees, because over the last 30 years, dozens of employees have gone missing on the mountain. And most recently, that includes Benny's best friend. So now Benny is looking for any sort of evidence she can to win a lawsuit she has going against White Rock. What she finds, though, is a body, but it's not a dead body. It belongs to a woman named Motheater, who was pulled out of the mountain by miners and left for dead. And we learned that Motheater is actually a 150-year-old witch and is struggling to remember how she ended up buried in the mountain. So the women come to an agreement. Benny is going to help Motheater recover her memories and regain like the full extent of her magic. And once that happens, Motheater is going to bring White Rock down, or at least force them to have to pay for their actions. I think looking at the setting itself, this town of Chiron, it kind of has Ethel Cain vibes because it's a city that's built around this commerce, this industry. In this case, it's the coal mining. And there are a lot of different people who are dependent on that industry to support their families. And so in order to support their families and to ensure that they maintain their jobs, there are going to be things that they overlook. So it's kind of like seeing the problems with society, but looking away from them. And I feel like that's kind of a theme that appears throughout some of Ethel Cain's songs, is being aware that the system, the community that you're part of has corruption, but not doing anything about it, just taking it as the status quo, as normal. But also this sense of like people being hurt, being killed, disappearing while mining on the mountain most recently reminded me of Nettles, because early in the song you have the mention of someone being hurt at the plant when there was the explosion. And throughout the book you get sort of instances of people being hurt while performing their jobs, and what that does to a person, how it changes their outlook on their job and just life in general. The main like Ethel Cain vibe, I would say, comes from the character of Motheater herself, and especially because she is a preacher's daughter. Her father, Silas, in the 1800s was a snake handling Presbyterian, like fire and brimstone minister, and not a very good minister, not a very good father, not a very good person. So thinking of Motheater and her father in relationship to the album Preacher's Daughter, but also especially the two versions of Family Tree that are on there, was a connection I made pretty early on, because there is contention between them. They find each other kind of like insufferable, and there's a lot of animosity between them because you see the ways that her father has failed her, and how partly as a result of that, Motheater has grown into this angry woman who is fueled by rage at not being accepted by her community, as being seen as other and being other. The relationship they have is a big factor in Motheater's character, because Silas has failed her, but also his separation from her has led her to kind of like separate herself from the entire town of Chiron. So while she is this neighbor, as she is called, not a witch so much, but she is Chiron's neighbor as she's serving them, they come to her when they need something, but otherwise they kind of just see her as a nuisance, especially because as they're trying to progress and embrace the coal mining industry, Motheater is very much against it. So much of her character is bound up in anger and resentment, and ultimately this anger is what poisons the mountain that the town of Chiron is mining into. There were things about it that I really did like, but on the whole, it was pretty underwhelming. And I think I liked it as much as I did because I went into it expecting to be underwhelmed. I looked at reviews, provided critique on different elements that people didn't find as engaging or even problematic. And I pretty much agreed with what a lot of people were saying. Some of the representation of Benny as a black woman in this predominantly white town, honestly, it felt kind of shoehorned in. And I don't know, it just kind of gave me like an ick feeling at times. The town itself, Chiron, is very insular. And unfortunately, that's also the case for the story itself, because you don't see characters interacting with too many other people. So Benny and Motheater, a lot of the story follows them, and they have some engagement with other people, but nothing really meaningful. I think the better example of a character navigating the world and the world influencing them is when we're in the past chapters following Motheater before she was put in the mountain, because you really do see her engaging with her community. And honestly, that's where I feel like the strongest tension comes from. Benny's chapters to me were more kind of like, I could take them or leave them. You gotta have them because I make up half the book. But I don't know, there wasn't a whole lot of agency or growth in those chapters. I didn't get much of Benny as a character. And this is also pitched as being queer romance. It definitely is queer, but the romance is kind of questionable as well. The writing is also at times extremely repetitive. You have some of the same lines being used, some of the same like physical descriptions and actions, and it really did get distracting. But at other times the writing really shines because you get this deep sense of somebody embedded in the culture of Appalachia, in the nature and the world around you, and this these elements that all come together. It was really fun to learn about all these different expressions, to see words be used in unique ways. And, the writing itself on a prose level, I did like it. I just wish some of the repetitiveness had been cut. Some of the kind of like blatant telling versus showing had also been nixed. And then it was just a little bit more polished. But aside from all that, I did like the characters. I really enjoyed Motheater. Benny, again, not so much. I liked Motheater a lot. And her relationship with her best friend in the past, Jasper, by far stole the show. I thought it was the best relationship depicted, and really enjoyed their interactions because I never quite knew what was going to happen between them. It kept me on my toes, and I really appreciated that. So, ultimately, yes, it does have Ethel Cain vibes. I liked it for that. I liked the setting and the atmosphere. Really liked Motheater. On a craft level, I think it could have used some work, but I'm not mad that I read it. I did like aspects of it and think it was worth the read. So if it does sound like something that might be up your alley, if you're looking for Appalachian witchcraft and a connection to the land and a sentient mountain that comes alive, give it a shot.
I'm a rolling stone, bound to roam. Come the morning, or I'll be gone.
6 pages in, and I've already found a typo. That doesn't bode well. Here we've got piggy spelled with an IE at the end, and then right below it's a Y. How do you miss that? That'll work. Okay. I fully intended to fix up cute and put in some effort to wrapping up this vlog, but no, we're just going with it because it has been a couple of weeks now since I finished reading Revelator by Daryl Gregory, and I've just been putting off filming because either I've been busy or I haven't wanted to. So here we are, wrapping up with the final book that I read for this vlog. All in all, yeah, I would say it does have big Ethel Cain vibes, especially looking at some of her lyrics from songs on Preacher's Daughter and how those songs and stories tie in to aspects of religious trauma. So yeah, I really enjoyed that aspect of the book. But what is this about? This is following a woman named Stella who, as a child, went to live with her grandmother in Cades Cove, and while there, briefly met the family's god, Ghost Daddy. So we're following her in the past sections when she was a child, and then in the present, we're following Stella as an adult. She is a moonshiner, a bootlegger, and she ends up having to go back to the cove after her grandmother, Maudie, passes away mysteriously. And she goes there to take care of this child, Sunny, who is a cousin of some sort. Of the 2 novels I read for this vlog, I do think Revelator is stronger. I think it has much better writing, structure, storytelling, kind of just all around. I think it is a more powerful novel. But I was still honestly kind of disappointed because, I don't know, not so much disappointed. It's just I didn't connect to it in the way I'd hoped that I would. It just really didn't click with me in the way that I wanted it to. Honestly, none of these books did. So, like, Coco enjoyment level, this blog might have been a failure. But Ethel Cain vibes, yeah, I would say it's a success all around. One of the shining points of Revelator for me is the fact that the women in Stella's family are called Revelators. Each generation, a specific girl speaks to Ghost Daddy and kind of communes with him. The purpose of those communions is so that the men of the family can then write down their individual books. So Stella has a book that is being written while she's a child, and she's able to read the books of previous women from her family. But what she ends up commenting on, and what stood out to me, is that it's the men who are telling these stories, who are writing the books and providing analysis of them. Each Revelator is only allowed to read the books of those who have already died. They can't read their own either, and this is something Stella really pushes up against. And as she gets older and enters young adulthood, she starts pushing against the boundaries that she has been brought up to fit into by the men in her family, specifically her uncle, who is telling her story and providing the analysis of it. It's not so much about her as a Revelator, even though her uncle and the other men who follow Ghost Daddy want her to believe that. They're using what she provides to get closer to Ghost Daddy, ultimately. Which is very, you see this in religion all the time, especially, hypocritical, hardcore Christianity. And I'm saying that as somebody who's a Christian. So it really does hit hard the way that Stella is forced to navigate this religious aspect while loving the God, while loving Ghost Daddy, but loving him from the confines that have been placed upon her. She's not supposed to talk with him unless the men ordain it. And very quickly, she says screw that, and she's kind of do what she wants, because she realizes that what the men are claiming Ghost Daddy wants is not what the God actually wants. Obviously, this is going to lead to a lot of conflict between her and the men who want to control her narrative, and the way that they look at her, the way that she is viewed in the community as a result of not only being this sort of pariah figure in Cade's Cove because her family is so divisive, but also because she's not falling in line with what they want, and they can't control her. And that's such a big part of any patriarchal society, is being able to control women and their voices and the stories that they are telling. I read a good chunk of this book while listening to the Perverts album from earlier this year, which I'd never listened to all the way through, but it's a perfect backdrop. The ambiance, the ambient noise, the kind of repetitive monotony of the songs on that album, and how it really set the mood for this book. I enjoyed that. Also, you start out with the creepiest version of Nearer My God to Thee. Loved it. Wonderful. Really kind of got me in the mood for something spooky. That's actually, though, where my critiques of the book start. This was not scary, and I thought it was going to be at least a little spooky with the figure of Ghost Daddy, but the God actually was kind of underwhelming. It makes sense that we don't get too much about Ghost Daddy, because as this eldritch horror god, they're sort of unknowable and indescribable. And so we don't get a lot of description about them as a character from Stella's perspective. And even when we see her and other people engaging with Ghost Daddy, the god is kind of just there. I found myself kind of wishing that the relationship between the Revelators and the god was a bit more intense. And I think that would have helped me better understand why Stella both loved and feared Ghost Daddy so much, because based on what we got, we were kind of just told about this and didn't really feel it. And I think that was probably my biggest issue with the book in general. And that kind of ties in with the writing, is that I didn't feel a lot. I didn't really care about anyone. I didn't get a feel for relationships or characters too much. And maybe it's because we didn't really linger with Stella's feelings. And that could very well be the point of the writing, because we learn some things about Stella that makes the narrative choices make sense, makes her not lack of emotions, but her ability to like section them off and like separate herself from them. It makes that make sense. But I still really wanted more from her and the story in general. Like I thought there was going to be more tension throughout, but it really ended up being just kind of bland, honestly. I wanted more conflict, more like internal and external conflict, and more tension in the relationships. I think that would have really pushed home the horror that we do get from the religious trauma aspect. But all of that is to say, I did like the book. I don't think it's great, and it's probably not something I would reread, but I would recommend it to people who are curious. It did fulfill the purpose of this vlog, and that was, it did give me Ethel Cain vibes. And I had a good time reading it. I think it could have gone harder, and maybe by looking at other books that I've had recommended to me that supposedly have Ethel Cain vibes, I will find what I was looking for with this book. Yeah, ultimately, I'm happy with what I read. I definitely did get Ethel Cain vibes. If you stuck around this long, thank you. I hope you enjoyed listening to me ramble about Ethel Cain songs and these books and any overlap that I noticed between them. If you have books, though, that you think have Ethel Cain vibes, drop them down below. I would love to learn more about them. And hopefully in the future, I can do another vlog similar to this, where I look at an artist's music and try to find a book or two that really resonates with me and has similar vibes.